Good morning, everyone. Welcome back to the second day of World Forum for Culture of Just Peace. Presidents, honorable guests, ladies and gentlemen, we are starting today with session 2, the role of intergovernmental organizations. This session will be chaired by Dr. Omar Gresh, Director of the Center for the Study and Practice of Conflict Resolution. Dr. Omar will chair the session that will be followed by His Excellency Nayef Falah Mubarak Hajarat, His Excellency Taib Bukush, His Excellency Salim Mal al-Malik, His Honor Abdullahi Ahmed Yusuf, His Excellency Khaled Khalifa, His Excellency Mohammed Al-Shafi, and Professor Alfred Vella. Thank you. I hope I was fine with pronouncing the names. Have a good session.
Thank you very much, Excellency, President Vella, Mr. Al-Babtain, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the second session of the forum where we will be discussing the role of intergovernmental organizations. And in order to set the ball rolling, I invite His Excellency Dr. Nayef Falah Al-Hajraf, current Secretary General of the Cooperation Council for the Arab States of the Gulf since February 2020, a former Minister of Finance of Kuwait, Chairman of the Board of Commissioners and Managing Director of the Kuwait Capital Markets Authority, also former Minister of Education and board member of the Youth and Sport Authority, as well as Vice President of the Gulf University for Science and Technology for Academic Services, to address us in this first session. Thank you.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. فخامة الرئيس دكتور جورج فيلا رئيس جمهورية مالطا، العم الفاضل عبد العزيز سعود البابطين رئيس مجلس أمناء مؤسسة عبد العزيز سعود البابطين الثقافية، أصحاب المعالي، السيدات والسادة، الحضور الكريم، السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. لعلنا نبدأ بشكر مستحق لرائد من رواد الفكر وعالم من أعلام الثقافة وداع من دعاة الأمن والسلام، فشكراً بقدر إيمانكم برسالة الثقافة والسلام العادل أيها العم الفاضل الجليل عبد العزيز سعود البابطين. والشكر موصول لجميع القائمين على المنتدى العالمي لثقافة السلام العادل بنسخته الثانية، ممثلة بمؤسسة عبد العزيز سعود البابطين الثقافية، على الدعوة الكريمة للمشاركة في هذا المنتدى الهام، والذي يأتي في وقت نحن بأشد الحاجة جميعاً لمن يذكرنا بأن الأمن والسلام نعمة تتطلب المحافظة عليها بإيمان الجميع بها وعمل الجميع المتكامل لصونها وتعزيزها لخدمة البشرية. كما أود أن أشيد بنتائج أعمال المنتدى العالمي لثقافة السلام العادل بنسخته الأولى، والذي عقد في لاهاي في عام 2019، والتي أكدت على تعليم قيم ومبادئ السلام في المناهج التعليمية، والعمل على تنشئة جيل واع في بيئة آمنة يسودها السلام والاحترام، وإدراج الوعي الوطني الذي يحافظ على التراث الثقافي، ونشر ثقافة السلام بين المجتمعات، وتعزيز الثراء الثقافي وهويات المناطق، وتعزيز قيم التسامح والتواصل بين مكونات المجتمعات، ووضع الاستراتيجيات اللازمة لمنع النزاعات المسلحة، وتعزيز الدبلوماسية الوقائية في ظل ما يشهده العالم من صراعات واضطرابات وتهديدات مستمرة للأمن والاستقرار الدوليين. أصحاب الفخامة والمعالي، السيدات والسادة، يأتي المنتدى العالمي الثاني لثقافة السلام العادل اليوم تحت عنوان القيادة من أجل السلام العادل، وسوف أتطرق لهذا العنوان في محورين: الأول جهود مجلس التعاون لدول الخليج العربية في تعزيز ثقافة السلام العادل، الثاني ضرورة حشد وتكامل جهود لترسيخ ثقافة السلام العادل. ففي المحور الأول المتعلق بجهود مجلس التعاون لدول الخليج العربية في تعزيز ثقافة السلام العادل، فلقد لعب مجلس التعاون لدول الخليج العربية منذ تأسيسه في 25 مايو 1981 وعلى مدى 4 عقود ولا يزال دورا رئيسيا ومحوريا في تعزيز الأمن والاستقرار في المنطقة والعالم، فأصبح ركيزة له ومؤمنا به وساعيا إلى صونه والمحافظة عليه، وداعيا إلى الحوار كوسيلة لحل النزاعات تحت مظلة ميثاق الأمم المتحدة والقانون الدولي. واستشعر مجلس التعاون أهمية ثقافة السلام العادل وضرورة تعزيز مفاهيم السلام والعمل الجماعي لتحقيقه، حيث يولي أصحاب الجلالة والسمو قادة دول المجلس حفظهم الله ورعاهم الاهتمام البالغ في صون الهوية الثقافية وجعلها ركناً أساسياً في الخطط الاستراتيجية والتنموية الهادفة لبناء الدولة والإنسان، فقد اعتمدوا حفظهم الله الاستراتيجية الثقافية لدول مجلس التعاون لدول الخليج العربية للفترة 2020-2030، والتي أكدت بأن المشاركة الثقافية حق لكل مواطن إنتاجاً واستفادة وحواراً ونقداً، والعمل على استيعاب روح العصر بتوظيف العلم والتقنية في المجالات الثقافية والحوار مع الثقافات الأخرى لتعزيز قيم السلام، باعتبارها مكوناً أساسياً من مكونات الحضارة الإنسانية، والتركيز على مبادئ التسامح والتعايش والحوار واحترام الآخر ونبذ مظاهر العنف والتعصب والتطرف. كما ركز محور الأمن الثقافي على تعزيز قيم الوسطية والتسامح والحوار والتعايش واحترام القانون بين مكونات المجتمع، ودعم حرية الفكر والإبداع وحماية المجتمع وخصوصاً الطفل من الثقافة المحرضة على العنف. ومن هذا المنطلق يسعى مجلس التعاون لدول الخليج العربية من خلال تعزيز مشاركاته في المحافل والفعاليات الدولية إلى بناء وتفعيل الشراكات الاستراتيجية مع الدول والمؤسسات والمنظمات الدولية، والاستفادة من تجاربها في دعم وتشجيع وإرساء ثقافة السلام بين أطياف المجتمع، والمشاركة في كل ما يضيف ويثري مفهوم السلام. فبناء ثقافة السلام مهمة مشتركة تتطلب تضافر الجهود الدولية وتوحيد الصفوف في مواجهة التطرف الفكري ونبذ العنف وتربية النشء الجديد على القيم الفاضلة والتسامح واحترام حقوق الإنسان. كما أن ثقافة السلام مفهوم يحتوي على منظومة قيم إيجابية تترجم إلى أفعال وسلوكيات تؤدي إلى تغييرات ونتائج داخل المجتمع من خلال تهيئة الظروف المؤدية إلى إحلال السلام، سواء على صعيد التعامل بين الأفراد أو الجماعات أو على المستويين الوطني والدولي. وهنا بالإمكان النظر لثقافة السلام كمنهجية واعتباره نمط حياة وهدف عالمي وضرورة بقاء. ومن هنا أولت دول مجلس التعاون كدول محبة للسلام في خططها الاستراتيجية والتنموية ورواها المستقبلية إشراك كافة فئات المجتمع في ثقافة السلام، وبخاصة المرأة التي تعد نصف المجتمع، وفئة الشباب التي تمثل عماد المستقبل وتشكل ما يزيد عن 60% من السكان. السيدات والسادة، أما المحور الثاني المتعلق بضرورة حشد وتكامل الجهود لترسيخ ثقافة السلام العادل، فينطلق مما استمعنا إليه وعلى مدى اليومين الماضيين وخلال جلسات هذا المنتدى من الجهود الكبيرة التي تبذل وعلى كافة المستويات لتعزيز ثقافة السلام العادل. ولعل استثمار منصة المنتدى العالمي للسلام، والذي تبنته مؤسسة عبد العزيز سعود البابطين الثقافية كمنصة عالمية تجمع أصحاب القرار والفكر والمجتمع المدني والجامعات والمختصين والمهتمين، تمثل فرصة تاريخية لحشد وتكامل الجهود العالمية لترسيخ ثقافة السلام العادل من خلال المبادرة والقيادة من أجل السلام العادل. إن جهودنا جميعاً لتعزيز ثقافة السلام العادل كأسلوب تعايش ومطلب ضروري لضمان مستقبل أفضل للجميع. أقول إن جهودنا نحو ذلك ستبقى غير مكتملة لتحقيق أهدافها إن لم تأخذ بالحسبان كل مهددات السلام العادل وكل عوامل نقضه وتقليصه. ففي الوقت الذي نناقش فيه اليوم جهود تعزيز ثقافة السلام العادل، يموج العالم باضطرابات غير مسبوقة وتصم الآذان طبول الحرب التي تقرع في أكثر من مكان، والكوارث والأزمات التي يواجهها الإنسان، فتعمي الأبصار صور الدمار القبيحة والمجاعات البشعة والانفجارات الدامية والكوارث الطبيعية. وفي الوقت الذي نأمل بتعزيز ثقافة السلام العادل، هناك ملايين الأسر المشردة وملايين الأطفال الذين حرموا من التعليم بسبب الحروب والكوارث والنزاعات، والذين يمثلون أهدافاً سهلة للفكر المتطرف والإرهاب. وفي الوقت الذي نعمل على تعزيز ثقافة السلام العادل، هناك عمل منظم لنقيضه، ومن خلال بعض وسائل الإعلام وبعض منصات التواصل الاجتماعي التي تهدف إلى تغذية الصراعات والنزاعات والإرهاب. وفي الوقت الذي نشحذ فيه الهمم والجهود لتعزيز ثقافة السلام العادل، هناك ملايين من الشباب في مناطق كثيرة حول العالم ممن فقدوا المستقبل واستسلموا لليأس والإحباط، فخبت جذوة التفاؤل وضعفت شعلة الأمل. الأمر الذي يحتم علينا جميعاً كصوت للسلام ومن إيماننا الكامل بضرورة تعزيز ثقافة السلام العادل أن نضع هذه المهددات ضمن مستهدفات العمل الجماعي، ولكي نمنح الشباب أينما كانوا أملاً بغد أفضل. وفي الختام لا يسعني إلا أن أكرر التحية لجميع الجهود التي بذلت لتحفيز الأطراف المشاركة على المستوى الاجتماعي والسياسي والعلمي للتركيز على سياسات الوسطية والتسامح والتعايش بين الأجيال والثقافات والأعراق المختلفة من أجل مستقبل آمن للعالم. كما لا يفوتني شكر جميع من ساهم في الإعداد والتنظيم والمشاركة في هذا المنتدى، وشكر موصول لجمهورية مالطا رئيساً وحكومة وشعباً على استضافة هذا المنتدى في ربوع هذا البلد الجميل. أشكر لكم حسن الإصغاء، والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.
For that salutary reminder of the importance of regional organizations in building peace, in bringing stability, and of course that is what the Gulf Cooperation Council has been doing for many years. We now move on to the next speaker, but before doing that, I want to remind all the speakers of the 8 minutes time limit for the interventions, please. And the next speaker is His Excellency Tayyip Bakoush, who is the Secretary General of the Arab Maghreb Union since 2016. He was previously in government as Minister of Education in Tunisia and Minister of Foreign Affairs as well from 2015 to 2016. And I would like to invite His Excellency Tayyip Bakoush to the floor.
أصحاب الفخامة والمعالي والسعادة، السيدات والسادة، أود بدءاً أن أتقدم بجزيل الشكر لمؤسسة عبد العزيز سعود البابتين على تنظيم المنتدى العالمي الثاني لثقافة السلام بعنوان القيادة من أجل السلام العادل، التي تستضيفها مشكورة دولة مالطا برعاية من سيادة الرئيس الدكتور جورج فيلا. ويسعدني أن أتناول الكلمة في المحور الثاني، وهو الدور المنظمات الدولية ومؤسسات المجتمع المدني في تجسيد مفهوم القيادة من أجل السلام العادل. وأني أنطلق في هذا المجال لا من الناحية الفلسفية أو الاجتماعية أو الحقوقية، وإنما من تجربتي الشخصية أميناً عاماً للاتحاد المغربي العربي، قادماً قبل المسؤوليات السياسية من منظمات المجتمع المدني الفكرية والنقابية والحقوقية. فخلال السنوات الخمس الأخيرة التي اطلعت فيها بمسؤولية الأمانة العامة لاتحاد المغرب العربي، أسعفني الحظ بإمضاء اتفاقية تفاهم مع الاتحاد الإفريقي الذي كانت الأمانة العامة غائبة عنه، خلافاً للتجمعات الإقليمية الإفريقية السبع الأخرى التي أمضت على اتفاقية التفاهم منذ سنة 2008 والتحقنا نحن بعد 10 سنوات، وتحديداً سنة 18 و2000. ومن أهم الهياكل الإفريقية التي اندمجنا فيها اندماجاً تاماً فاعلاً هو هيكل الأمن والسلم الذي طور منظومة سلام للوقاية من الإرهاب، ونظم عديد الندوات والورشات بهدف إسكات البرادق ونزع الأسلحة الخفيفة والثقيلة والتصدي لتدفقها وإصلاح القطاع الأمني وإرساء حكامة الحدود والحد من مخاطر الكوارث وتنظيم الهجرة للحد من الهجرة غير النظامية التي تفتح الباب أمام تهريب المهاجرين واليد العاملة والاتجار بالبشر، ليتوسع ذلك إلى تهريب السلع الذي أصبح مقترناً عملياً بالإرهاب تمويلاً وحماية، فهذا يمول والآخر يحمي، حتى أصبحت الجريمة المنظمة وتجارة المخدرات وتبويض الأموال من أهم الهواجس الأمنية. وإزاء تشعب هذه المسائل وترابطها، تم على الصعيد الإفريقي ثم المغاربي تركيز وحدات إنذار مبكر للوقاية من هذه الآفات إلى جانب بناء القدرات. وتقوم الأمانة العامة لاتحاد المغرب العربي بالتعاون مع الاتحاد الإفريقي وبدعم أحياناً من الاتحاد الأوروبي في إطار البرنامج القاري لهيكل السلم والأمن أبسا الرابعة بتنفيذ أنشطة تهدف بشكل أساسي إلى نشر ثقافة السلم والأمن ونبذ العنف على المستويين الإقليمي والقاري، والحث على الالتزام بالمبادئ العالمية لحقوق الإنسان والمعاهدات والمواثيق الدولية. وخلال هذه السنوات الخمس الأخيرة شاركت الأمانة العامة للاتحاد المغاربي في جل هذه الأنشطة التي قاربت 40 بين قمم ومجالس وزارية قطاعية وندوات خبراء وكبار المسؤولين، هذا فضلاً عن النشاطات المشتركة الإفريقية الأوروبية في إطار 5+5. بيد أن التجربة أكدت لنا أكثر من مرة أنه لا يمكن الاكتفاء بالمنظمات الرسمية، وأنما يتحتم تشريك مؤسسات تقع بين الحكومي والمدني وتربط بينهما، لأن الشعوب هي الخاسر الأكبر من غياب الأمن والسلام. لذلك عملنا على التنسيق بين البلديات المغاربية بالتعاون في البعض منها مع المنظمة الدولية للبلديات الفرنكوفونية IMF، وكذلك مع المنظمات الشبابية والنساء الرائدات والجامعات، وكذلك البنوك في إطار اتحاد البنوك المغاربية. فلا مراء في أن الاستثمار وتوفير مواتن الشغل للشباب وخلق الثروة ورفع مستوى الإنتاج والتوزيع العادل لنتاج النمو بترجمته إلى تنمية بشرية شاملة مستدامة، إنما هي جميعاً روافد للاستقرار والأمن الإنساني والسلام العادل الذي تتوسع رقعته من الإطار الوطني إلى الإطار الإقليمي فالإطار القاري ثم الدولي. ولذا ختاماً وجب نشر ثقافة العمل وحقوق الإنسان لأنها من القيم المرتبطة بقيم العدل والأمن والسلام. شكراً لكم على حسن الاستماع.
Thank you very much indeed, Your Excellency, for that intervention, focusing on the importance of cooperation between international institutions as well as cooperation between governments and civil society, particularly in the context of facing transnational challenges where cross-border cooperation and cross-institutional cooperation is essential. We now move on to our third distinguished speaker, His Excellency Salim Al-Malik, who is the Director General of the Islamic World Educational, Scientific and Cultural Organization, ISESCO. His Excellency Al-Malik holds a PhD in Allergy and Immunology, very topical, I suppose, as well as a PhD in Pediatrics. He held the position of General Supervisor of the General Department of International Cooperation in the Saudi Ministry of Education, as well as advisor to the Minister for Health Affairs. Your Excellency Al-Malik.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين. في يوم من أيام السلام الحفية التي يجسدها هذا المؤتمر العالمي الواعد، يطيب لي أن أحييكم بتحية السلام العظيمة، فالسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. وأنتم تلتقون في هذا المحفل الذي يبين عن الجدية والعقلانية والتحلي بالمسؤولية، وهو يلتئم في ظروف بالغة التعقيد على الصعيد الدولي ليتداول بالرأي والحكمة حول موضوع الساعة وموضوع كل ساعة. فالسلام يبقى أبداً في حاجة إلى مناصريه فكرياً وعملياً، إذ لا معنى لحراك العالم كله ما لم تصنه رغبات السلام وعزائم السلام وأفعال السلام الكبار. والتحية تمضي إلى صاحب الفخامة رئيس مالطا، وإلى الشيخ عبد العزيز بن سعود البابطين، ولأصحاب المعالي والسعادة، وللحضور جميعاً الذين أعلم كم يكتنفهم من العرفان القائمين على أمر هذا المؤتمر الذي يقتضينا إعمالاً مستنيراً لخطى السلام وحملاً أميناً لمشاعله في عالم يشهد من التحولات ما ينشد كل ما يحقق الاستقرار الذي هو أساس التنمية، حيث لا تنمية بلا استقرار ولا استقرار بلا سلام. ولأن تكاثرت الدعوات باسم السلام مؤخراً على المستويات المؤسسية والتنظيرية، إلا أن مفهوم السلام العادل يبقى هو المنشود الأهم الذي تنظر إليه مجتمعاتنا وتنتظره، وهي تخوض حرباً ضد التخلف والفقر والجهل، وقد اختبأت مسبباتها جميعاً في ظلم الإنسان أخيه الإنسان. وإيماناً من منظمة العالم الإسلامي للتربية والعلوم والثقافة إيسيسكو برجاحة كل جهد يبتغي تعزيز السلام كقيمة حياتية حاسمة، فإنها ما برحت تعمل على ترسيخ دعائم الفكر السلمي والنأي عن التطرف والبعد عن العصبية والكراهية، حفزاً لروح الحوار بين الثقافات، ويقيناً بأن الحوار هو أساس السلام. وعلى ذات النهج مضت الإيسيسكو خطوة عملية باستحداثها برنامج سفراء الإيسيسكو من أجل السلام، الذي تطمح من خلاله إلى بناء قيادات شابة من مختلف دول العالم تحمل راية السلم الكفيلة بجعل المعمورة فضاء رحباً للتعايش الإنساني المبدع في مجالات العلوم والفنون والرياضة والآداب. وبذات الرؤية أنشأت المنظمة مؤخراً مركزاً متخصصاً للحوار الحضاري يعنى بتعزيز مفهومه في الدول الأعضاء والمجتمعات المتاخمة، هذا فضلاً على سعي المنظمة لإدماج السلام في مناهج التعليم الأساس، مع تركيزها على أن تكون تطبيقات الذكاء الاصطناعي في خدمة مفاهيم السلام، والتأكيد على وجوب الحد من تنامي ظاهرة استخدام الألعاب الإلكترونية وسط الناشئة بما تحمله من مفاهيم خاطئة تفضي إلى تفشي جرائم العنف والعنصرية القاتلة. وبذا فإن الإيسيسكو لا تقف عند حدود قولها لا للحرب، بل أكثر من ذلك تقول نعم للسلام، وهي تطمح عبر برنامج الريادة من أجل السلام إلى أن تشهد 500 من سفرائها الشباب يجوبون العالم بحلول عام 2025. صاحب المخامة، أصحاب المعالي والسعادة، الحضور الكريم، إن إيلاء الثقافة الاهتمام اللائق بها كمرتكز لخدمة السلام هو توجه ناجع، إذ إن مدركات السلام تحمل ذخائر نفيسة تعين على تمثل التنوع الإنساني الرائع بما يتضمنه من تباينات هي مصدر قوة وثراء، لا كما يراها البعض مصدر بغض وعداء. ومن هذا المنطلق حق لهذا المؤتمر أن يتوافق على رؤية تعبد الطريق أمام المجاميع المتلهفة لأن يسود العالم من روح السلام ما يجنب البشرية نذر الخراب ويساند مسارات الإعمار الخلاق، فلترفرف حمائم السلام ولتمضي قاطرة الأمن نحو غاياتها النبيلة لتنتصر حقوق الإنسان وحقوق الإنسانية التي تنشد دائما قامات ريادية استثنائية تدرك معاني السلام وتلتزم بمبادئه وتحتمل تضحيات الجسام التي تطلبها طريقه المحفوفة بالتحديات. كما أن على مؤسسات المجتمع المدني واجباً ضخماً في تحمل تبعات نشر ثقافة السلام في ظروف يصعب على كثير من المؤسسات الحكومية الرسمية الوفاء فيها بتلك المتطلبات. ولنا في مؤسسة عبد العزيز بن سعود البابطين الثقافية خير شاهد على مدى القدرة في النهوض بثقافة السلم والمنافحة عن مرتكزاتها، فالشكر لراعي هذه المؤسسة، والشكر لهذه المؤسسة المخلصة للثقافة والمثقفين على تنظيمها المتقن لهذا المؤتمر. كما أحيي الحكومة المالطية ممثلة برئيسها الفاضل الاستضافة الكريمة في أرضها الجميلة التي عاهدت نفسها أن تكون أرضاً للسلام، فمنها من مالطا السلام، ومن مؤتمر السلام التي نثر في المهج والأرواح عدالة ثقافة السلام العادل، أعلن انطلاقة الدورة الثانية من برنامج الريادة في مجال السلام والأمن والذي تنظمه الإيسيسكو، وأدعو الشباب من جميع دول العالم إلى التقديم للانضمام لهذا البرنامج الواعد. وليكن مختتم الحديث تلكم الإشارة القرآنية الموحية التي تعظم من شأن السلام الذي اتخذه الله العلي اسما له، يقول تعالى: وإن جنحوا للسلم فاجنح لها وتوكل على الله إنه هو السميع العليم. وفقكم الله، والسلام عليكم مجددا وفي كل حين.
Thank you very much indeed, Your Excellency Salim Al-Malik, for reminding us of the importance of culture, science, and also technology, especially now the reference to the role of digital gaming in spreading peace is, I think, particularly apposite. And now it gives me particular pleasure, as someone who has been lecturing international law for the past 20 years or so, to introduce His Honor Abdul Qawi Ahmed Yusuf. He's a judge at the International Court of Justice and since 2009, and has served as president of the court from 2018 to 2021. His Honor holds a PhD in international law from the Graduate Institute in Geneva, but has also completed postgraduate studies in international law in Florence. And Your Honor, the floor is all yours.
President George Vella, Sheikh Abdul Aziz Saud Al-Babtain, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I look at the theme of this forum, and I am reminded of the mission of our court, the International Court of Justice, peace and justice. This mission was entrusted to the court by the Charter of the United Nations. The court carries out its function by settling all disputes between states in accordance with international law. The greatest innovation of the UN Charter 75 years ago, as compared to the covenant of the League of Nations, was the prohibition of the use of force. Instead of recourse to the use of force, the Charter introduced and established the principle of the peaceful settlement of disputes as one of the cardinal principles of the organization. It is through this undertaking in the UN Charter that mankind had finally come to the realization that the old system, which had made war permissible among nations to right wrongs, was not only barbaric and brutal, but fundamentally unjust. Might is right has never helped humanity to live together in peace or in harmony. In the past 75 years, the International Court of Justice has proudly assumed its role as the guardian of the international rule of law. It has substantially contributed to the avoidance of war among states. As was stated by St. Thomas Aquinas already in the 13th century, and I quote, "Peace is the work of justice indirectly, insofar as justice removes the obstacle to peace." That is what the court does. It removes the obstacles to peace among nations. That is what we will try to do next week when Ukraine and Russia will appear before our court on Monday and Tuesday. The action of the court is based on the consent of states. The parties in dispute must be willing to accept or must have accepted in advance the jurisdiction of the court to resolve their dispute peacefully. In other words, they must have faith in the rule of law and in the capacity of an independent judicial body to interpret the law and apply it. The good news is that this faith has substantially increased in the past 75 years. More trust is placed today in the work of the court than ever before. That is why Ukraine came to the court last week, and that is why the Russian Federation accepted to present its case to the court next week. The preeminent role of the rule of law as a factor for harmony and security in any society cannot be questioned. However, the law is always an instrument and never constitutes an end in itself. The end is the well-being of the human being. The end is the well-being of human society and the greater good. Peace, stability, and justice are the most important symbols of such greater good. We have to acknowledge also that there are many disorders, tensions, and disputes which by their very nature elude the grasp of the law and hands of the court. Even the most advanced societies cannot be completely juridicized. The law cannot claim by virtue of its instrumental dimension, to apprehend all aspects of the real. In any society, there are tensions which, to a greater or lesser degree, are diffuse or chronic, and which, when they have no clearly defined object, pose a threat to the social order. That is the reason why, in the search for peace and justice, other factors besides the law need to be taken into account. Such factors can complement the role of the law to bring about peace and harmony in society. I am referring here to education, to shared cultural values, to the marshalling of moral solidarity, and to the imperative of social and economic justice, and of course, of climate justice. That is where the contribution of institutions such as the Al-Babtain Foundation and the World Forum for Culture of Peace is most needed. I will conclude with a few words on the theme of the conference, just peace. Peace and justice are indivisible. It is by cultivating justice that peace can best be harvested. Just peace cannot be one group or one nation's own kind of peace. Peace is a shared value. Just peace is that which encompasses moral and ethical imperatives. A peace which ensures social and economic justice and the protection of human rights. Just peace is not the opposite of just war. There is no just war. War can never lead to justice. The UN Charter did the right thing for humanity in prohibiting the use of force in international relations. We must now find a way of punishing the use of violence and armed conflict as a means of settling disputes from all organized human societies. I personally believe that it's not an impossible goal. We should strive to achieve it. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Your Honor, for that very rich presentation highlighting the cardinal role of international rule of law and the principle of legality in international life, but also the relationship and interrelationship between law and other aspects of human life, such as education, culture, and dialogue. We now move on to our next speaker, His Excellency Khaled Khalifa, who is regional representative of the United Nations Human Rights Commissioner for Refugees, former head of office at United Nations IRIN News Service, and representative of the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees to the GCC. Your Excellency.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. It is always very difficult to follow such great speakers, but bear with me. His Excellency, the President of Malta, Dr. George Vella, His Excellency, Dr. Abdulaziz Al-Babtain, President and founder of Abdulaziz Saud Al-Babtain Foundation, honorable heads of state, ladies and gentlemen. Before I read my word, I just want to mention some figures to put things in context and to set the scene for what I'm going to say. And I hope the literature of the conference could be updated because those figures change regularly. As we speak now, 84 million people have been forcibly displaced. 84 million. If you put all those people in one country, it becomes one of the most densely populated countries in the world. However, the figure itself is not the issue. It's the distribution of this figure. It's the demographics of this figure. 86% of this total live in developing and underdeveloped countries. 73% of the total live in neighboring, immediate neighboring countries. Almost 60% of this whole total come from the member states of the Organization of Islamic Cooperation. Almost 60%. If we move to the Middle East, the figure is also stark. Almost 39% of the caseload come and live in the Middle East, despite the fact that the Middle East does not represent more than 5% of the world population. Ladies and gentlemen, it is a great pleasure to be with you today in the second edition of the World Forum for a Culture of Peace, launched by the Abdulaziz Saud Al-Babtain Foundation, in light of such time when the culture of peace is most needed. By virtue of the roles and responsibilities entrusted to me by the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, I witness on a daily basis the impact of missing peace. We deal with the consequences of missing peace on the lives of thousands of vulnerable families and individuals who were forcibly displaced in search for safety, security, and decent life. The Global Trends report we launched at the end of last year shows that forced displacement continues to rise, to break new records every year. The numbers are not becoming less. For 9 years in a row, the numbers keep growing. With more than 84 million people fleeing violence, insecurity, and climate change, the majority of whom are women and children, coupled with the pressing psychological effects of the absence of peace, especially in light of protracted conflicts, which often have a major impact on children and growing feelings of fear and anxiety. And I stress here also the word protracted. Those emergencies last sometimes for decades. We were marking 4 decades after the Afghan crisis. 4 decades. People are living in refugee camps, living in countries. Some people are born, grow up, and even die in a state of displacement. UNHCR's mandate is indeed a living example of that. The United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees was established in 1950. And its tenure at that time was supposed to be 3 years. 3 years only to deal with the consequences of the Second World War. However, with the emergence of new conflicts and the increase of humanitarian needs, UNHCR continued to be needed, and it's now 71 years old. And we are not proud of that. During his speech to the Nobel Peace Committee, and UNHCR won the Nobel Prize twice, once in '54 and once in '81, the High Commissioner appealed to the world, and I quote, he said, on UNHCR's 70th anniversary, my challenge to the international community is this: put me out of job. He asked the world to put him and the organization out of a job. Make it your goal to build a world in which there is truly no need for a UN agency for refugees, because nobody is compelled to flee. It is only possible to establish a culture of peace through the generation of leaders, because our reality today shows with deep regret that we have failed to achieve it. And we must invest in efforts to establish it through targeted educational programs at various stages, to include the principles of brotherhood and altruism, and to highlight the importance of diversity and enhance the spirit of community, citizenship, and the unity of destiny. Among the initiatives taken by UNHCR is the establishment of the Council of Multi-Religious Leaders in cooperation with Religions for Peace, with the aim of supporting the joint efforts of religious leaders in different regions and of all faiths to address the root causes. And this is a very important term. We are dealing with the symptoms. As a humanitarian organization, we must deal with the root causes if we are to reach any solution. In conclusion, we value the deep partnership we have with the esteemed Abdulaziz Saud Al-Babatin Foundation, represented by His Excellency Abdulaziz Saud Al-Babatin, which aims to support efforts to promote peace around the world for groups that need it the most. We must always remember that we are still facing challenges in our world today, and that peace has become a luxury and even a dream for millions of people around the world. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Your Excellency, for that very topical reminder of the very real human cost of conflict, and also the long-term impact of this cost. In this context, one can also, of course, refer to the plight of the Palestinian people who have been refugees for so long, and especially in some cases, refugees in their own country, in their own land. So moving on to our next speaker, His Excellency Mohammed Al-Shafi, who is Ambassador and Executive Director of the European Commission and League of Arab States Liaison Office based here in Malta, which was established as a result of an agreement between the European Commission and the League of Arab States a decade or so ago. Your Excellency, Mohammed Al-Shafi has been a diplomat serving with the League of Arab States in various capacities, and he has now taken this office in Malta, and the floor is yours.
فخامة الدكتور جورج فيلا رئيس جمهورية مالطا، معالي الدكتور عبد العزيز سعود البابطين رئيس مؤسسة عبد العزيز سعود البابطين، أصحاب المعالي، أصحاب السعادة، السيدات والسادة الحضور، يسعدني أن أكون بينكم هذا اليوم ممثلاً لجامعة الدول العربية ولأمينها العام معالي السيد أحمد أبو الغيط، وأن أنقل إليكم تحياته وتمنياته بالنجاح لهذا المنتدى، وأن يحقق الأهداف المرجوة منه. السيدات والسادة، يأتي انعقاد هذا المنتدى في توقيت بالغ الحساسية، وذلك في ضوء تنامي خطاب الكراهية وارتفاع معدلات التمييز وكراهية الأجانب وانتشار الأفكار المتطرفة، وتصاعد تلك الظواهر تؤكد الحاجة الماسة إلى الحوار باعتباره السبيل الوحيد لتعزيز الاحترام والتفاهم المتبادل بين الشعوب المختلفة، وبوصفه أحد السبل المساهمة في ترسيخ ثقافة السلام وقيم التعايش السلمي بين الشعوب من خلال تكريس ثقافة التعددية الثقافية والدينية باعتبارها عامل إثراء وليس منطلقاً للفتنة. إن السلام هو عملية إيجابية تشاركية مرتبطة بتحقيق الديمقراطية والعدالة والتنمية المجتمعية، وبما يكفل الاختلافات وتشجيع الحوار، ويتطلب بناء ثقافة للسلام عملاً تربوياً وتثقيفياً واجتماعياً مدنياً شاملاً، فهي مجموعة من القيم والتقاليد والعادات وأنماط السلوك وأساليب الحياة تعبر عن احترام البشر وحقوقهم، مع رفض كل أشكال العنف والاعتراف بحقوق البشر في حرية التعبير والتمسك بالديمقراطية والعدالة والتنمية والتسامح والتفاهم بين الأمم. وفي ظل تنامي معدلات الإرهاب والتطرف والتمييز العنصري، وإدراكاً من قبل منظمة الأمم المتحدة لمخاطر تلك الظواهر وتداعياتها السلبية على مختلف الأصعدة السياسية والاقتصادية والاجتماعية والفكرية، كانت الجمعية العامة قد أعلنت في 20 نوفمبر عام 1997 بموجب قرارها 52/15 اعتبار عام 2000 بوصفها السنة الدولية لثقافة السلام. وفي 8 ديسمبر عام 2017 تبنت الجمعية العامة للأمم المتحدة القرار رقم 72 على 130 باعتبار يوم 16 من مايو يوماً عالمياً للعيش معاً في سلام. ولذا أغتنم الفرصة للإشادة بجهود كافة المنظمات الدولية والإقليمية لنشر ثقافة السلام والتسامح بين الشعوب والأمم، والتصدي لظواهر التطرف والإرهاب والتمييز العنصري على أساس اللون أو الدين أو العرق أو الجنس. وفي ظل التحديات الراهنة، فإن جامعة الدول العربية تسعى بكل جهدها على حث الدول الأعضاء من ناحية، وعلى التعاون والتنسيق مع كل المنظمات الإقليمية والدولية ومؤسسات المجتمع المدني على الحوار بشكل سلمي وتدبير الاختلافات في إطار ديمقراطي يحفظ الكرامة والحرية وقيمة الإنسان، وكذلك العمل على تحقيق أهداف التنمية المستدامة لعام 2030، وبالأخص تحقيق الهدف السادس عشر، والذي يدعو إلى العمل على بناء مجتمعات متماسكة شاملة ومتماسكة ومسالمة، وذلك بما يضمن تحقيق العدالة للجميع وبناء مؤسسات فاعلة ومسؤولة عن كافة المستويات. كما تسعى الأمانة العامة لجامعة الدول العربية لبناء جسور التواصل بين مختلف المجتمعات والثقافات والأديان سبيلاً إلى تعزيز التفاهم وضمان التعايش السلمي بين أجيال اليوم والغد، وإدراكاً منها بأن المؤسسات الدولية والإقليمية الأضلاع الرئيسية في دفع عجلة التنمية إلى جانب الحكومات. حرصت جامعة الدول العربية على بناء شراكات مع العديد من المؤسسات في هذا المجال، منها مؤسسة الأزهر الشريف ومؤسسة عبد العزيز سعود البابطين الثقافية والمجلس العالمي للتسامح والسلام ومؤسسة أنا لينز للحوار والثقافات، مجموعة أصدقاء تحالف الحضارات من أجل تعزيز الحوار بين أتباع الحضارات والثقافات المختلفة ونشر قيم التسامح وقبول الآخر ودعم التفاهم والاحترام المتبادل بين مختلف الأمم والشعوب، ونشر ثقافة السلام المستدام وتحقيق أهداف التنمية المستدامة. السيدات والسادة، أغتنم هذه الفرصة لكي أتوجه بالشكر الجزيل وعظيم الامتنان والعرفان إلى السادة المنظمين لهذا المنتدى الهام، ونتمنى أن يمثل إضافة نوعية للجهود المبذولة لنشر ثقافة السلام المستدام والتسامح والتعايش السلمي بين المجتمعات ومكافحة الظواهر والتعصب والعنف والتمييز. وفقنا الله جميعاً لما فيه خير الأمم والشعوب، والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. I think that was another important reminder of the multifaceted nature of peace, how it can be viewed from education, religious, culture, governmental and intergovernmental perspectives, but also something I took particularly from that intervention was the reference to peace as a process, and remind me very much of the quotation from the US award-winning journalist Elizabeth Neufer, who said peace is a journey, not a destination. And I think that's a very salutary reminder. Moving on now to our final speaker, certainly last but not least, and it gives me, of course, particular pleasure to be introducing the Rector of the University of Malta, Professor Alfred Vella. As an academic at the university, I know how much value we attach at the university to peace and the role that Rector has played in increasing and improving the quality of peace education and conflict resolution at the university. Professor Vella has been Rector for the past 6 years of the University of Malta. Prior to that, he was Pro-Rector for Academic Affairs. He's a Professor of Chemistry at the University of Malta with a specialization in environmental chemistry, which is another aspect of peace, of course, environmental perspective. So, Professor Vella, of course, great pleasure. The floor is yours.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, firstly, I would like to thank His Excellency President George Vella and Mr. Al-Babtain, Chairman of the Al-Babtain Foundation, for the invitation to address this prestigious event, now in its second edition. I'm delighted to associate the University of Malta with this initiative. And on behalf of the university, I would particularly wish to record my appreciation to the Al-Babtain Cultural Foundation for supporting the work of our Center for the Study and Practice of Conflict Resolution. In recent months, the Al-Babtain Foundation has established an endowment for peace building within the center, which I'm sure will bear considerable fruit. Before focusing on my remarks on the relevance of higher education and the universities within higher education and peace building, I want to express my solidarity to all the people of Ukraine who are currently the victims of a horrific military aggression that is causing havoc, destruction, and the loss of many lives. In particular, I think of the Ukrainian students, academics and teachers at all levels, whose lives have been shattered and whose educational journey so brutally interrupted by bombs. The University of Malta currently hosts 11 Ukrainian students who are studying with us on campus and 7 staff members from that country. Of course, we have an important number of Ukrainian alumni who I hope are keeping safe in this terrible context. In my brief remarks today, I will share some thoughts on why universities should engage in peace building and also suggest some of the ways in which we can do so. In this context, I will first offer a few reflections on the purposes of universities and why their mission must necessarily include the building of peace. I ask, what are universities for? Universities and other higher education institutions should not simply be viewed through a drably utilitarian lens of their contribution to the economy, industry, or the labor market. Universities' role is far more multifaceted and goes beyond the purely utilitarian or economic one. As the Chancellor of the University of Oxford, Lord Patten, has remarked, universities serve the future by shaping the citizens who will create that future. If we are doing our job well, we shape citizens by passing not just knowledge and skills, but also a commitment to civic engagement and ethical behavior that will affect communities and the broader world around us. It is incumbent on universities to encourage students to consider and actively engage with notions of citizenship and public ethics. Anyone who has attended university should have a basic understanding of and a positive disposition to the rights and duties associated with citizenship, principles of sustainability, as well as the different aspects of justice, such as intergenerational and social justice. Indeed, it is noteworthy and commendable that this event is titled Leadership for Just Peace. It is nowadays accepted there can be no peace without justice. And in this context, universities have a special role to promote justice as a fundamental value. The link between peace and justice unpacks numerous perspectives. The need for equality between states and between individuals, the need to respect fundamental rights and freedoms, including the right to self-determination for nations, as well as the right to be free from discrimination of any kind for every community and every individual. Achieving these objectives is an extremely urgent, but also complex endeavor. It requires efforts across the globe and across societies, not just at the level of governments and political leaders, but especially, I would argue, in the educational sector, the place where citizens, and very often their leaders, are formed. One of the most distinguished educationalists of the 20th century, Maria Montessori, in her collection of essays titled Education and Peace, states unequivocally, establishing a lasting peace is the work of education. All politics can do is keep us out of war. This is not to minimize the role of political and national leaders in the sphere of high politics and diplomacy. But as we are witnessing today, and as we have learned throughout the ages, while political leaders may be crucial in negotiating ceasefires to stop armed conflict or bring about de-escalation to avert conflict when it is brewing, the deep-rooted causes of war, be they structural, cultural, or psychological, will not be resolved simply by negotiation, diplomacy, legislation, or political diktat. The root causes of conflict need exploration, analysis, and addressing, and education is pivotal in such processes. The realities which Montessori highlighted in 1949, that is, that real peace is more than the absence of war, were confirmed by the founders of conflict resolution and peace building as distinct academic disciplines. Pioneers like Johann Galtung and John Burton developed ideas which helped us better understand the nature and types of conflict, as well as develop processes through which conflicts may be addressed. Johann Galtung developed and expanded the concept of positive peace. He argued that the mere absence of physical violence, which he termed negative peace, is an insufficient conception. What conflict resolvers and peace builders needed to focus on was addressing structural and cultural forms of violence. Structural forms of violence, according to Galtung, occur when societal structures oppress groups and communities, or even entire nations and continents. Racial or religious discrimination, unfair and unequal economic structures, as well as patriarchal structures, are examples of structural violence. Only when these structures that cause violence and conflict are reimagined and reformed can positive peace be achieved. John Burton, on the other hand, developed the human needs theory of conflict, which postulates that one of the key drivers of conflict is unmet human needs. These needs range from the basic need for food to that for recognition, equality, and respect. Unmet human needs, according to Burton, cause disruptive and conflictual responses. An appreciation of the needs of others is another critical perspective, which universities should foster. In this context, it seems self-evident that higher education has a pivotal role not only in leading peace research, but also in forming citizens who are attuned to the requisites of peace and justice. Universities are unique spaces where often all the actors in peace building, which this conference brings together, meet and interact. National leaders, in most cases, would have been educated within university structures, as have parliamentarians and protagonists from civil society. Indeed, it is common for today's political and civic leaders to have been involved in university activism as students, where they would likely have played leadership roles. Universities are thus spaces where such leaders may experience how ideas are formed and challenged, and where they learn and acquire values that remain embedded in their psyche and mindset to later influence behaviors that permeate national and international life. If universities take this responsibility of promoting a culture of just peace seriously, the dividends could be enormous. This requires universities to be given the resources to fulfill their mission, but also have their academic independence sustained and protected. Cooperation amongst institutions engaged in higher education is another invaluable aspect of the peace-building agenda in academia. We need more cooperation, not just regionally, but also across regions and globally. Such cooperation yields fruits in numerous ways, academically, scientifically, and economically, because when universities pool their resources, they can more effectively develop new knowledge, new procedures, products which can improve our quality of life and well-being, as well as contribute to economic development. Inter-university cooperation creates bonds of friendship between academic communities and contributes to a better understanding and appreciation of each other's traditions and cultures. When such cooperation is extended to students, the multiplier effect of such connections is even more impressive. In this context, I would argue that one of the European Union's most successful and impactful projects has been the Erasmus exchange program. And I hope the EU will continue in its efforts to extend this program wider and deeper to include as many students from across the world and not just Europe. I would like to conclude my intervention by reiterating the commitment of our university to contributing towards peace building. This commitment is twofold. Firstly, by promoting positive values such as social justice, environmental ethics, human rights, equality, and cultural dialogue. And secondly, by cooperating in peace-building initiatives with like-minded academic institutions, as well as governmental and non-governmental actors. Let me refer here to an observation by Professor Juliet Milliken, which I find particularly apposite and worth reflected upon. Universities are complex institutions with specialists in many areas, invariably separated into different disciplinary silos. A cross-institutional or interdisciplinary response in which researchers, practitioners, and students from all disciplines work together to address the triggers behind conflict may be the most viable approach to managing and minimizing conflict in the longer term. We need a structured, systemic approach to recognizing the existence of conflict and the responsibility of higher education to address it. I fully subscribe to this view of the role of universities in resolving conflict and building positive peace. We are certainly committed to this vision at my university, and we look forward to working with others to contribute to peace based on justice. And I sincerely hope that the peace-building platform being created through the excellent efforts of the Al Babtain Foundation will accord due importance to the potential of universities as a crucial pillar in this noble venture. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Director, for that tour d'horizon of the multifaceted nature of the role of universities in peace building and the role of academia and developing concepts of peace as well. And I think that brings to an end this session, the role of intergovernmental organizations. I would like to thank all the distinguished speakers for their contributions. And I think now there is an announcement on next steps.
Ladies and gentlemen, now it's time for a short break, 15 minutes please, and then we will move to the session number 3. Thank you. Presidents, Your Excellencies, honorable guests, ladies and gentlemen, we are now starting with session 3, the role of the parliamentarians and civil society organizations. This session will be chaired by His Excellency Angelo Farrugia, Speaker of the House of Representatives of Malta. The floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency George Vella, President of the Republic of Malta, Mr. Abdulaziz Saud Al Batten, the Chairman of the Abdulaziz Saud Al Batten Cultural Foundation, honorable members of Parliament, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, I am truly honored to be present in this World Forum for Culture of Peace, and it is indeed an, I would say, additional privilege for me to open this session, which we will examine the role of parliamentarians as being leaders for peace. We are currently living in a, what I call, insta world. We want everything to happen instantly, immediately. Instant coffee, instant photographs, instant noodles or porridge. Through Instagram, which, by the way, is a portmanteau of instant camera and telegram, we have found ourselves in a new world of influencers, sensationalism, following people and people being followed. Instagram is a window into many stories. And since the telegram days, of course, I remember those days, most certainly before, one can say that parliamentarians have been always at the forefront of such personal stories through first-hand experience in their respective constituencies, being leaders in their own, I would say, respects. People listen, and of course, people follow. Our leadership in our respective communities may influence our way of formulating our thinking process, while also, of course, legislating and militating towards just peace. We, and I say we, in the Maltese political setting, we build relationship with constituents in a very personal approach and manner. We experience moments of sincerity, vulnerability, sometimes sorrow and sympathy, and also tears, especially in the light of the military invasion of Ukraine by Russian forces. I personally fear that this attack may have further far-reaching consequences, which may affect world peace and security. I have already expressed my solidarity with the people of Ukraine in such a difficult moment, and an hour ago, I was addressing the European Parliament online, in the presence of other members from all over Europe and Ukrainian Parliament. And I hereby reiterate my appeal for restraint and for the resumption of diplomatic dialogue to reach a peaceful settlement of this conflict. Well, today we can see the rampage of the consequences of the war in real time through social media. Thus, rather than self-promotion or promoting what have been now become petty political agendas, we must come together. We must join forces, but we must produce solutions for the greater good now more than ever. Additionally, of course, we cannot not mention the COVID pandemic that has put us all into overdrive to manage all the crises it posted. And it is very easy to become jaded by the horrors of what is happening and becoming pessimistic. Pessimism that may lead to inaction, and inaction that eventually gives way to inattention. Auschwitz victim and saint, I have to refer to him, Maximilian Kolbe, said, and I quote, "The most deadly poison of our times is indifference." And that is what we should fight. We should fight together indifference. And yes, the essential role that we, namely the parliamentarians and NGOs and the journalists who are here today, must together all play is to stop ourselves from ever simply turning away. But we must also continually confront stakeholders, including the governments and the United Nations Security Council, with individual faces and stories of injustice, civilians who are undergoing political turmoil, and take action immediately. So it is very apt that today's forum is being held here in Malta. It's a long-standing vocation for dialogue and peace in this region. And this, I would say, was evidenced also during 1975, I have to recall that, the Helsinki Conference on Security and Cooperation in Europe, at the time CSC, whereby it was upon Malta's insistence that European leaders realized the validity of dialogue and the imperative need to include all the Mediterranean countries. So it was included in the Mediterranean chapter in the final act, as you know. At that time, Malta argued that there could not be peace in Europe without having peace in the Mediterranean, في البحر المتوسط. Today, Malta continues to hold dearly to this vocation, and through various institutions and organizations on endeavors to promote dialogue and peace as a means towards attaining more security, stability, and of course, complementing with prosperity. Allow me to touch also upon the establishment of the Global Council for Tolerance and Peace, which was established also in Parliament recently in 2017, and was actively contributed to raise awareness on the importance of promoting tolerance and peace, whilst facilitating dialogue between various stakeholders and parliamentarians. It is interesting to mention that the scope and function of the Global Council for Tolerance and Peace is complemented also, as I said, with the work of the International Parliament for Peace, bringing together numerous members of parliaments and directly contributing to this global movement for peace and acceptance. Let us thus be, and I quote the word that I used in my original speech today, let us be influencers for peace, for political justice and security everywhere. I'm confident that the speakers that we have, the distinguished speakers that we have in this session, discussion that will follow, will certainly diverse perspectives of how best to promote and sustain peace. Peace education should become an essential part of our curriculum. It is only through education that the necessary mentalities, the necessary attitudes, and preparedness can be achieved to provide further and fertile grounds, proper fertile grounds for peace and to thrive. Thank you very much. Excellent presentation, especially in giving us a more vivid experience of what's happening in Ukraine. Of course, this is utterly unacceptable. And as you said, 2 days ago, United General Assembly declared in a very strong vote, it was 104 to 1 against 5, that the Russian government must immediately cease its force against Ukraine, of course, and withdraw all the military forces. And as you said, democracy should not be selective. Now I call, I do have in my list Bahjet Pacholi. He is member of parliament from Kosovo, but I'm informed that he's not here for health reasons. So I move to Mr. Abdel Salem Lebar. He is the head of the Istiqlal Independent Parliamentary Group of the House of Councillors in Morocco. Yes, I call you. Thank you. You got the floor.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والصلاة والسلام على النبي المصطفى الكريم وعلى آله وصحابته أجمعين. فخامة الرئيس جمهورية مالطا، الإخوة الأفاضل، أصحاب المعالي، أصحاب الفخامة، إخواني البرلمانيين، الحضور الكريم، كل واحد باسمه وصفته والصفة اللائقة بقدره الكريم. لم أغفل أن أثني وأحيي عالياً فخامة الشيخ عبد العزيز سعود البابطين، رئيس هذه المؤسسة، مؤسسة البابطين للسلام العادل. فهنيئا لنا، هنيئا لنا بأن نسمع صوت ياتي من بعيد، صوت ياتي عالي من صومعة تنادي بالرجوع إلى الحق، بالرجوع إلى السلام والسلام العادل. فما أحوزنا إلى مثل هذه الأصوات النادرة في عهدنا هذا. حضرات الأخوات والإخوة الكرام، تلقينا بشغف وحب وتقدير دعوة مؤسسة عبد العزيز سعود البابطين لحضور هذا المنتدى، حضور هذا المنتدى. فكنت من القابلين ومن المتصرعين لأحظى بشرف تواجدي معكم كبرلماني من شمال إفريقيا من المملكة المغربية. حضرات السادة، اجتماعنا هذا اجتماع ناجح شكلا ومضمونا، ناجح فعلا، لأننا استطعنا أن نجهر بكلمة حق، أن نجهر أو نرجع عالمنا هذا إلى جادة الصواب. اجتماع هذا اجتماع ناجح بكل المقاييس، وما علينا إلا أن ننوه ونشكر مؤسسة عبد العزيز سعود البابطين على ما تبذله من جهد وجبار لإسماع صوت السلام، صوت العدل، صوت الحق، الخالق الجليل من أسمائه الحسنى السلام. والسلام سيستمر السلام ما دامت أصوات تردد السلام وتدعو إلى جادة الصواب. فأشكر كل من ساهم في إنجاح هذا اللقاء، جنود الخفاء التي تبذل قصارى جهدها تنظيما، شكلا وتوجيها وإرشادا. وأخص بالذكر الدكتور التهامي عبدول ورفقائه ورفيقاته الذي أتاحت لنا هذه الفرصة المريحة للاجتماع وللتحاور. الشكر موصول لجمهورية مالطا رئيسا، برلمانا وشعبا على كرم الضيافة وحسن الاستقبال وتوفير المناخ الجيد للحوار الهادف والجاد. حضرات السادة والسيدات أصحاب الفخامة، نجتمع اليوم ونحن نشهد عالما يعج بالتوترات. هل فشل الحوار؟ هل نحتاج إلى عقل سليم آخر؟ أليس منكم رجل راشد؟ قول الله سبحانه وتعالى: أليس منكم رجل راشد؟ هنا أقف لأنوه بمخرجات هذا المنتدى الثاني عندما قرر رئيسه والمشرف عليه أن نكون لجنة تفتح الحوار من جديد مع الأطراف المتنازعة حاليا والتي شدت أنظار العالم، صغيرها كبيرها شيخها، عالمها اليوم مشدود الانتباه إلى ما يجري اليوم من تقتيل، من حرب سوف لن يكون الرابح فيها أصلا، فالرابح لن يكون رابحا والخاسر سوف لن يكون وحيدا، بقدر ما أن العالم سيخسر اليوم. كل حرب أينما كانت وحيثما وجدت، العالم الذي لم يستطع أن يتغلب على حل المشاكل ما بين الطرفين المتنازعين، كل واحد في هذا العالم يضع يده على قلبه ويتذكر الحرب أينما كانت، ويتذكر بالضبط همومها مخلفاتها. كم من متشرد يبقى، كم من لاجئ، كم من طفل، كم من امرأة، كم من مسن سيضيع تائها ويأسف على وجوده في هذه الحياة. وجد الإنسان ليعيش حياة كريمة. تبارك الذي بيده الملك وهو على كل شيء قدير، الذي خلق الموت والحياة ليبلوكم أيكم أحسن عملا. أيكم أحسن عملا. العالم اليوم يجب أن يحسن العمل، العالم اليوم يجب أن يوجه نحو السلام. أرض صغيرة، العالم قرية، مدينة، بل بيت صغير. حياتنا جد صغيرة وقصيرة جدا. فلماذا التطاحن؟ لماذا إراقة الدماء؟ ماذا ستكلف الحرب؟ أتعرفون ماذا؟ ستخلف اليتامى، ستخلف الضحايا، ستخلف ما أكثر ما تخلفه دمار الإنسانية، دمار ما فعلته الإنسانية، المآثر الاجتماعية. ثقافتنا ستذهب. اليوم نعيش بنشوة مما خلفه أجدادنا وأسيادنا. هذه آثارنا تدل علينا. فاسألوا بعدنا عن الآثار. أي آثار سنخلف نحن اليوم في هذا العصر؟ سنتحدث عن الاقتتال، سنتحدث عن الدمار. أف للماء والأرض التي لا تسوي أي شيء. أسباب النزاع الموارد الطبيعية، الماء، الأرض وغيرها. كل شيء لا يساوي أمام حياة فرد. الفرد اليوم يجب أن يعيش. أحيي الشعوب التي فتحت الحدود وجعلت العالم كله في كأس صغير جدا. الكل يعيش، ينشد السعادة، ينشد الفرحة، ولا ينشد الدمار وقتل الأبرياء. نتأسف، أي منا لا يتأسف اليوم؟ والعين قصيرة والعين بصيرة واليد قصيرة، فلا يسعنا إلا أن نكثف جهودنا. نحن البرلمانيين، نحن الحكومات، نحن المجتمع المدني اليوم كلنا مسؤولون. عندما تقع الحرب معنى أننا فشلنا. نحن فشلنا في التوافق، في نشر المحبة، في نشر الإخاء. الشيء الذي جعلني أرى مؤسسة عبد العزيز سعود البابطين في قمة من ينادي إلى الرجوع إلى الحق والابتعاد عن الظلم، عن الكراهية، عن العدوانية. وهيا جميعا نعمل من أجل شعوبنا. عدم التفرقة ما بين المرأة والرجل، عدم السماح أو عدم القهر والاحتقار، عدم الغطرسة، عدم الاستقواء والأنانية. الأنانية المفرطة هي من تؤدي إلى هذا الدمار. عاشت الأمم السعيدة النشيطة. من منا اليوم يحب أن يموت بدون أجل؟ أبدا. حتى ولو كان الإنسان السوي يحاول أن يقتل نفسه سوف لن يستطيع. قوة داخلية في جسمنا تحول دون أن نموت، فما بالك بمن يأتي بدمارات، أسلحة دمارة. فهيا جميعا نوقف الاتجار في الأسلحة كيفما كان نوعها. إن الحقد والكراهية لا يولدان أو لا يولدان إلا العداوة، وهذه العداوة يكون مصيرها الاقتتال والحرب والدمار. نحن كبرلمانيين علينا اليوم أن نجتهد في تأطير شعوبنا، في تأطير مؤسساتنا بمشاريع تنشر المحبة والتقدير. سوف لن أتوقف، لأن كلما ذكرنا وتأملنا في واقعنا نجد أننا مقصرين في عملنا، والحمد لله نرى أن هذه المؤسسة وهذا المنتدى يرجعنا إلى جادة الصواب. يقول الله سبحانه وتعالى: إن أريد إلا إصلاح ما استطعت وما توفيقي إلا بالله عليه توكلت وإليه أنيب والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله.
Thank you, Abdel Salam Labbar.
Excellent speech.
For your passionate speech. Of course, you mentioned a very important point that war is always a failure. And that we have to continue on struggling and being always a voice for peace. Now I call the next speaker, His Excellency Struan Stevenson. He was a former member of the European Parliament. He was also president of the Parliament Delegation for Relations with Iraq in 2009-2014. Yep. And also chairman of the Friends of Free Iran Intergroup between 2004 and 2014. His Excellency Stevenson was also coordinator of the campaign for Iran Change and also an international lecturer at on the Middle East and president of the European Iraqi Freedom Association. And I'm sure that you are also very deeply involved in political justice and humanitarian campaigns, especially in the Middle East. You've got the floor.
Your Excellency, President Vella, Your Excellency, Mr. Abdulaziz Al-Babtain, Your Excellencies, Presidents, Ministers, lawmakers, ladies and gentlemen, it's my great honour to have been invited to address this outstanding forum. Against the tragic background of a new war, we need your leadership for just peace and this remarkable effort to promote the culture of peace. So this is the perfect stage to tell you about a new global initiative to introduce an international treaty to ban the political use of religion. The mission captures the spirit of this forum. It's a natural part of the incredible effort of President Vella, of Mr. Al-Babtain, and all those who aspire for just peace. Everyone knows that one of the main messages of all religions is to be kind to one another. But unfortunately, religion has often been used as a weapon. When we look at the world today, and in the last few decades, we see that the abusive mixing of religion and politics has been the main root cause of the worst conflicts. There have been thousands of attempts to solve this problem, but very often they end up doing more damage than good by giving ammunition to the extremists. I believe that we now have the ultimate solution to set global rules to disarm religious extremism. An initiative led by the London-based NGO Be Pure International, Ban the Political Use of Religion, Be Pure. Unlike all previous attempts, this historic mission comes from the utmost respect for all religions, with a unique understanding of all sensitivities surrounding this minefield and how to build a global and respectful consensus. The proposed treaty represents a new approach to introduce clear, simple, and indisputable international rules to ban all political uses of religion that undermine human equality, all religious discrimination in rights and duties, all religious exclusion, and all restrictions to freedom of religion and belief. These simple terms would apply to all violations without any clashes with religious beliefs. One of the central points of this initiative is the fact that we cannot single out any specific religion or any specific country. There is no solution for this problem on any national stage. We need fair global rules for a global problem. Now, this is not separating religion and politics. On the contrary, we believe such a separation is not only irrelevant, but it's also impossible, even in most of the Western nations, let alone other parts of the world. We only need to stop the political abuse of religion and all religious discrimination. This initiative is building phenomenal support worldwide because it is indisputable. No responsible government or person can refuse such fundamental fair rules. No one can say, no, I want to use religion to discriminate between people. We believe that this non-confrontational approach is the only way to build global consensus, to help the international community eliminate the root causes of religious extremism and deal with most of the current and future conflicts. The evidence is here. The support for this initiative is accelerating rapidly among distinguished leaders, officials, lawmakers, philanthropists, influential people, royalty, UN officials, religious leaders from all over the world, and international organizations. The roadmap of this historic mission is to secure governmental adoption, to table the proposed treaty at the UN General Assembly, and we are very close to achieving that objective. Malta, Kuwait, and all your countries can certainly make history by leading this mission to eliminate the political abuse of religion. We have advanced agreements and engagements with many governments. Large groups of parliamentarians have already asked their governments to adopt this initiative, especially in Morocco, in Bangladesh, Italy, Austria, Pakistan, and most recently, the United Kingdom, where 27 cross-party parliamentarians have asked the Prime Minister to adopt the initiative. How and why could he say no? And that is only the tip of the iceberg, as we have different levels of support in more than 60 other countries, including many of your countries. In May, we are organizing an international conference in Morocco with 7 Moroccan NGOs and the National Human Rights Council. More than 100 lawmakers, officials, and religious leaders will meet to coordinate the international efforts to enact this significant UN treaty. Your Excellencies, we are getting very close to a new era, where all mankind agrees to stop all political abuses of religion. And I believe it's a great opportunity for your countries to take leading positions in this historic mission. It's very easy for any government to say yes to adopting this initiative because it is unthinkable to say no. It would be very rewarding for any government to lead the world to a better future. The proposed treaty would certainly make a massive difference to the lives of billions and serve all international humanitarian objectives by eliminating the root causes of many intractable conflicts and a long list of violations of human rights. It would subsequently enhance stability and open the door for sustainable development. Many of the conflicts in the world today could be solved if we all speak with one voice. Every corner of the world will benefit from this treaty. Not only the countries which are imprisoned in the cycle of religious violence. You could ask, why did we miss a simple solution like this for so long? If we had had this treaty 70 or 50 or even 20 years ago, we could have prevented the destruction of so many countries. We could have saved millions of lives and livelihoods. This treaty would also reflect on every aspect of life by creating functioning and responsible societies worldwide. Your Excellency, President Vella, Your Excellency, Mr. Al-Babtain, Your Excellencies, Presidents, Ministers and Lawmakers, this initiative is an interpretation of your admirable effort and a natural part of your remarkable leadership for just peace. This is your initiative because your leadership would make a crucial difference to this effort to enact a significant UN treaty that would certainly make the world more tolerant, more fair, and more peaceful. Thank you very much.
Mr. Storm Stevenson, and thank you for emphasizing this proposed United Nations treaty. You elaborated in your speech about political abuse of religion. And definitely it's of paramount importance. Now I call Mr. Jesmond Saliba, who is in Malta the Commissioner for Voluntary Organization in Malta. Yes, Jesmond Saliba is the founder and managing director of Corporate ID Group, a policy, communications and strategy consultancy firm. He has extensive experience in the media, public affairs, and also business management, focusing on strategy and communications. He has also served in several roles in the public. I know that he served in voluntary and commercial sectors throughout his professional career, with responsibility also for stakeholder engagement and policy building. He has a background in the social sector and currently sits in the board of governors also of Dar Tal Providenza, which is a residence in Malta for persons with disabilities, and forms part also of the management team of another organization, NGO, Fondazione SEP, which runs community services for vulnerable children and families. He is also a MIM Council member and also produces and presents a number of media programs on the EU, local and international current affairs. You've got the floor.
Thank you, Honorable Farrugia. Your Excellency, President Vella, Your Excellency, Mr. Abdulaziz Saud Al-Babtain, Various Excellencies, distinguished guests, thanks for the privilege to address this forum. It was said many times, and I repeat, yes, we're living in really dramatic times. I come from a generation who, in their teens, witnessed and welcomed, with a certain euphoria, the historic fall of a wall, and lived the process of unification of a continent on the ideals of peace. I remember it was a time to dream and hope. My children's maternal Polish grandparents, in their teens, however, witnessed the horror and destruction of war. This morning, like other mornings since last week, I had once again to explain to my 12-year-old girls what's going on at the doorstep of one of their homelands, when just only a few months ago, we were speaking about the process which led their both homelands, Malta and Poland, be part of a project which was born from the ashes of war. Explaining what's going on to children is a difficult and daunting task for any parent, let alone how tragic it is to flee from war when you're a child, because children need safety. They need to feel in a safe world, and they do not always understand why this safety is hindered by greed. Children. Children, to me, are the essence and personification of common good, a notion which we often mention, but hardly see put at the center of our activities, Because if we really believe in the common good, if we strive for the common good, we would all do things more different. The famous Schuman's Declaration, which inspired the creation of what today is the European Union, states that world peace cannot be safeguarded without the making of creative efforts proportionate to the dangers which threaten it. And here we are. What we're witnessing in Ukraine shows, like what we witnessed in the previous years and decades in the Balkans, Middle East, and the Gulf, that peace is threatened and endangered. And the danger is real when we ignore the common good and greed takes over. Greed takes over and the safety and freedom of people is threatened. How shall we respond to this? And as Commissioner of Voluntary Organizations and Civil Society Organizations, what role civil society has in all this ask? We have to dare to dream, like Your Excellency, Al-Babtain. Dream of a world where peace prevails. But we have a responsibility to act too, to make the dream a reality, and we all have a role in this. Civil society organizations has the power to be an enabler of social cohesion, promoters of active citizenship, and safeguards of the common and greater good in society through their special characteristics and values. Yet recently, researchers internationally have shown that globally many voluntary-based organizations, cooperatives, associations, mutual funds, philanthropic organizations, transnational advocacy groups, and more recently, social entrepreneurs, have purposes closely related to their particular interest, and as such, are not necessarily directed towards a common good. So we all have a responsibility. This reality comes from the fact that also civil society organizations have also to deal with an array of stakeholders that have expressed different and sometimes even divergent claims in their recent times. Donors, funders, beneficiaries, workers, regulators, and most importantly, the volunteers, which are the heart of any civil society organization, have different interests in and representations of the performance and the identity of an organization. So being accountable to all of them, which is one strategy among others to legitimize an organization's being and doings, might just be an impossible task, but also a source of opportunities, as there is no clear-cut hierarchy among them and no obvious common ground. The concept of just peace has several defining elements. It rests, however, on specific understanding of the word peace. One of the definitions of just peace says that it is a social condition of harmony, wholeness, completeness, prosperity, welfare, and tranquility. It's a state of social and societal well-being in which all relationships and which the basic needs of people are met. This can easily be seen as the common good, embodied, as defined earlier, in children and future generations. The well-being of society of the future needs active citizens. This is fundamental as politics in liberalized market economy increasingly become an exercise in creating institutional structures for the pursuit of sectional self-interest. So we need to make a recommitment together to living for the common good. At this very particular period in the history of humanity, in this very sad chapter of world history, we have a call which we need to answer together, political leaders, civil society, and active citizens. Yes, together, we all have an obligation to make a recommitment to living and strive for the common good. Each sector should not view itself independent from other sectors. Together with all our ideas, values, and diversity, we can make a difference if we put the common good as our goal to attain just peace. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jesmond, for your presentation and also emphasizing the role of civil societies and coming in terms with what we really mean by peace, a true definition of peace and the common good. Now I ask the Jean-Christophe Bast, he's the CEO of Connectors for Peace, as our last speaker, but not least. He's currently, as I said, the CEO for Connectors for Peace organization. He's the former CEO and Executive Board Chairman of the Dialogue of Civilizations Research Institute, a position he has held up to September 2018. Previously, he was also the head of strategy and development of the United Nations Alliance of Civilization between 2008 and 2014. And also, he was the head of the policy dialogue of the World Bank between 1999 and 2008, and also director of democratic citizenship and participation of the Council of Europe between 2014 and 2015, and the first director of the Aspen Institute in France between 1994 and 1999. Of course, he's also the author of Europe à la carte, which addresses the issue of European identity. You've got the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for your gracious words of introduction. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. It's a great pleasure to be here. Also, I'm well aware that being the last speaker in the last session, in the last day of this forum, and on top of that, right before lunch, that my task is certainly impossible to expect to be heard. But nevertheless, I would like to say a few words of gratitude and to thank the Al-Babtain Foundation and the Republic of Malta for their hospitality and organizing this very timely forum. I'd like to express to Chairman Al-Babtain and President of Malta my gratitude, Mr. Touhami also for putting together this event, and also to all speakers this morning and yesterday. I think I learned a great deal. These were very inspiring words, and it's good to, and also reassuring to see that today and yesterday, you know, we were all together as champions for peace. And in a way, I'd also like to stress, you know, how much I was inspired last night to read this book from the Chairman Al-Babtain, and I think this book should be almost mandatory in schools around the world, and probably the world would be a better place if everyone would read this book. And Mr. Chairman, as you have been using this beautiful image of just peace being a candle, be assured that we are certainly all committed here to maintain this flame alive and vibrant, and that even so we are in a very difficult circumstances, there is still people committed to peace, and that peace will prevail. Let me very briefly, because I know time is very short, to introduce, maybe that's my privilege being the last speaker of this, at least of this session, to introduce a perspective that is based actually on research and academic evidence. And even so, since last week, we are living in a very different world. The reality of the post-Cold War, as shown by research by UNESCO, but also by the Heidelberg Institute for International Conflict, shows that most conflicts in the world today are not conflict between member states, but they are within countries. And what we are witnessing, again, based on those research, is that 2/3 or even more of the conflict today are rooted in culture, in cultural divide, in ethnic divide, in a way, identity. And in a way, it's quite striking to see that most conflicts today are domestic conflict, and opposing different people from different culture, different identity. And in a way, we see more and more countries in different parts of the world that are, in a way, coming closer to sort of civil war. There is a situation that we have never been witnessing, or not in the recent time, and we see increasingly societies that are fractured, that are divided, and the dividing line, which used to be during the Cold War and until a recent time, ideology, is now between identity. So we have moved from dividing lines that were based on ideology to identity. And, you know, of course, we can take multiple examples, but at the Connectors for Peace, we have developed this sort of theory or observation of two major dividing lines. One that we call the vertical dividing line, which is between, let's say, the globalist and the localist, two group of people who are having very different perspective. Those who are having exclusively the global perspective, who are very agile, speaking languages, navigating a global world, and who are losing a sense of, in a way, their roots and tradition and culture. And at the other side of the spectrum, you have the people who are, let's say, the localists, who are profoundly and deeply entrenched in their culture and tradition, and those two groups are increasingly moving in opposite direction, dismissing each other, hating each other. And then you have the horizontal divide that is between the secular and the religious. Those who consider that religion has nothing to do with society, nothing to do with public policy, nothing to do, this is purely private. And then you have at the other side of the spectrum those who consider that we as individuals are nothing but the emanation of a transcendental spirit and religion, and that religion should take over public policies, but also the public space. And these, again, are two tribes or two groups that are going increasingly in opposite direction. And then you have multiple of those dividing lines, you know, between the LGBT and the family-oriented group, between the abortion and pro-life, between the climate activists and those who refuse or ignore, between the vegetarians and the carnivore. And these are multiple topics that are fracturing our societies and that are leading, and we see, again, in many parts of the world, countries that are on the verge to, in a way, to collapse, or where society are so divided that there is almost nothing left in terms of a common denominator. And also with social media, with also sometimes the decline of the role and the power and the influence of politicians, hate speech, fake news are giving even more voice to those who are at the extreme. And we see societies that are increasingly polarized. But in a way, the reality of our societies is not at those extremes. Those extremes are very much heard because of social media that are, in a way, demultiplying their voice. But the reality of our society is in between those groups. People who, in a way, oscillate between those extremes. And that's, in a way, what we call the silent majority of the moderates. And one, if not the major imperative for political leaders, for civil society, for media, for everyone, is to strengthen the voice of the moderate. And because in a way, and that's the topic today, is that, of course, government can play a tremendous role through public policy and regulation to prevent or to mitigate the risk of tensions. But the reality is that in a way, you don't touch the mind and the heart of people with public policy. And this is where comes into play the connectors. The connectors are a whole range of groups and activities whose core business is to connect people. If you take, I know that time is short, but I would just like to make my point in 1 minute, if you allow me. If you take sports, if you take music, if you take entertainment, if you take the arts, if you take the whole range of sectors, they are convening and connecting people regardless of their belief, regardless of their identity. If you and I are going to a stadium or a music arena or wherever, we don't ask our neighbor what is his or her political, sexual, food, religious orientation. We are in the stadium because we are willing to share our passion for sport, and this is a way of building common societies. Therefore, what we are doing at Connectors for Peace, working very closely with UNESCO and a wide range of partners around the world, is really to make those connectors, sport federation, art, entertainment, film industry, to make them aware of their role, of their responsibility, and their capacity, because they are touching the mind and the heart of people, that they can be peace changers and they can be the peace advocates. So this is what we are doing. Unfortunately, time is too short to go into details, but I just would like to say that our goal is really to create a world coalition of like-minded organizations, really to give a voice and to support, again, the politicians and government whose role is indispensable but not sufficient to promote peace and cohesion society. So we need really to create this coalition and to engage all those economic and arts and cultural sector to become the peace advocate. And in that respect, we are certainly very keen to work with, of course, the Al Babtain Foundation and to join forces, because I think the task is so huge that if we really want to have an impact, we need to work together and we need to join forces. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Jean-Christopher Buzz. And that leads us to the conclusion of the session on the role of parliamentarians and civil organizations. And I want to thank all the speakers in this session. And we are all part of this continuous expedition towards a life of tranquility, a life of harmony, and a life of peace. We have to continue on struggling to do this. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Please, Your Excellencies, remain seated on your seats. This was just session 3. We are now approaching the closing session, and I am, again, more than honored to invite to take the floor to Mr. Abdulaziz Saud Al Babtain to have his final word. Thank you.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. تمنيت أن لا تكون كلمتي هي الأخيرة، وأطمئن زميلي الذي سبقني الآن عندما شك بأنه الأخير، لا أقول له أنت ما قبل الأخير وأنا الأخير. فخامة رئيس جمهورية مالطا الدكتور جورج فيلا، فخامة رئيس ألبانيا السير إليرميتا، معالي رئيس البرلمان المالطي أنجلو فروجيا، معالي السيد محمد ناشد رئيس برلمان جمهورية المالديف، السادة الرؤساء، السادة نواب رؤساء البرلمانات والسادة البرلمانيون، السادة الأمناء العامون والمدراء العامون للمنظمات الدولية للمؤسسات التعليمية وممثلو منظمات المجتمع المدني، السادة الوزراء والسادة السفراء، عفوا، والسيدات والسادة السفراء والسيدات والسادة الحضور، يقتضي الواجب أن أوجه إليكم جميعاً بأسمى عبارات الشكر والتقدير على نجاح فعاليات هذا المنتدى الثاني لثقافة السلام العادل، والذي كنتم السبب الرئيسي في إنجاحه، فشكرا لكم. هذا النجاح المشترك إنما هو ثمرة صدقنا جميعا وإرادتنا جميعا في التعاون البناء من أجل تحقيق غايتنا النبيلة. وينبغي أيضا شكر وتقدير فريق رئاسة جمهورية مالطا بقيادة فخامة الرئيس جورج فيلا وفريق عمل مؤسستنا وكل من ساهم بشكل أو بآخر في تنظيم المنتدى والعمل على نجاحه. لقد تابعت بانتباه وبسعادة غامرة كل مداخلات القادة وممثلي المنظمات الدولية والبرلمانات والمجتمع المدني، وهي جميعها على غاية الأهمية من حيث التحليل والرؤية المستقبلية والمقترحات الإيجابية. وانتهيت من ذلك إلى 3 نتائج كبرى. الأولى، إن السلام العادل حق مشروع للبشرية جمعاء، بل هو الحق الجامع لكل حقوق الإنسان، ومن أراد معرفة هذا الحق الجامع أي السلام العادل فعليه أن يعرفه بجوهره وهو العدل. الثانية، إن أعداد قادة السلام العادل من الأجيال الشابة والقادمة وتمكينهم من ثقافته هو حاجة تاريخية إنسانية ملحة يجب أن نشرع فيها فوراً ودون تأخير، وكل تأخير له نتائج وخيمة على مستقبل الإنسانية. الثالثة، إن جهودنا من أجل تحقيق ذلك إنما هي جهود جماعية مشتركة تفاعلية تختص بها مؤسسات حكومية ودولية ومدنية مختلفة، ونحن متفقون على هذا التمشي الجماعي. لذلك لا بد من إيجاد آلية عمل مشتركة للتنسيق والتدريب والإعداد للقادة، وهي المنصة العالمية للسلام العادل التي يجب أن نعمل على تأسيسها في كل الدول تكنولوجياً. في الختام أجدد التأكيد على التزامي من خلال مؤسستي بتأسيس هذه المنصة العالمية للسلام العادل والعمل معكم من أجل جعلها شاملة لأغلب دول العالم وشعوبه، وأن أواصل الاستثمار في ثقافة السلام العادل. شكراً فخامة الرئيس جورج فيلا، شكراً للشعب المالطي، شكراً على حسن الإصغاء، وفقنا الله جميعاً، والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.
Honorable guests, ladies and gentlemen, I am now inviting His Excellency George Vella, President of Malta, to give his speech in this closing session. Thank you to everyone.
Excellencies, dear guests, allow me first of all to extend my warm thanks to all of you who made it to this Forum for Culture and Peace in Malta possible. I start with Mr. Abdulaziz Al-Abtain and his team for the cooperation extended to my office before and during this event. I also heartily thank His Excellency Ilirmeta, Her Excellency Vjosa Osman Sidriou, and His Excellency Stepyan Mesic for their presence and their very inspiring participation. This was a very clear sign that against a backdrop of a pandemic and an ongoing war happening on European soil, people want to come together and to talk about a peaceful and just coexistence. It gave me great satisfaction to meet with some of you informally during this forum, as I could feel the engagement of important agents for peace firsthand. Peace is not only the task of elected politicians. It finds roots and strength in the daily work of multilateral organizations, ambassadors, academics, civil society, NGOs, voluntary organizations, students and youth. This is what enriched the value of this forum. It was inclusive and had a comprehensive approach. From a proud national perspective, I very much feel that this forum continues to strengthen Malta's international profile as a promoter of dialogue and mutual understanding. As has been remarked by our distinguished speakers, this has been Malta's mission along the centuries. It is this mission, this vocation, I would even say, is one we will continue to nurture not only in our immediate neighborhood in the Mediterranean with our partners in Europe and the Arab world, but also on a global level when we are elected to the United Nations Security Council this June for the terms 2023-24. I was very impressed by some of the observations made over these 2 days. First of all, I refer to the compliment paid to Malta by Mr. Al-Babtain himself, where he described my country as a rich mosaic of cultures, with a long-standing record of intercultural dialogue. I agree fully with him as he insists on the need to remain unified in pursuing our common objective of peace. Equally correct is the statement that merely believing in peace is not enough. We have to tangibly promote and apply it in practice. Our collective efforts need to be geared at finding a path to mutual cooperation. I highly appreciated the message passed on to us by His Excellency El Ghanim, Speaker of the National Assembly of Kuwait, who referred to, and I quote, wisdom of the Mediterranean. It would be good for us, countries of the region, to reflect on this phrase and assess where the wisdom could be put to better use. I also wish to thank President Ilirmeta for his very interesting intervention and reflections on what is actually happening in Europe and around us. Excellency, I found your thinking of the link between true leadership and democracy as very fitting in the present circumstances. As the President rightly pointed out, expansionism and ethnic division continue to threaten stability in our shared region of the Mediterranean as well as the Western Balkans. I thank the President also for the reference he made to the strong bonds, people to people, that exist between people to people, which developed between Malta and Albania throughout the years. President Vjosa Osmani Sidri also had a very inspiring and heartfelt speech. It was very much reflected and was expressing our common feeling for the citizens of Ukraine, our sympathy and our sorrow. The punchline there, one we should all carry in full view, is that every individual has an absolute right to peace, which is an observation which is very pertinent to today's world. we were reminded of the huge importance in today's world of the correct use of social media. Those of you who follow my work locally and abroad know how strongly I feel about the way on the use of social media for the benefit of society and not for its disruption. Yesterday, we also had the pleasure of listening to former President Stjepan Mesic, who focused on the qualities we as political leaders should put to good use in the promotion of just peace. Allow me to add that at this particular juncture in European history, we can all witness what a true leader stands for. This requires a sense of self-sacrifice for the common good and to the benefit of their brethren. President Mesic stated an evident truth that we sometimes all underestimate. In the vast majorities, he said, all people around the world want peace. And then we had 2 sessions of very interesting interventions, which I don't have the time to go into the detail of what each and every speaker said. Obviously, we had the session on the role of governments and international organizations, as well as the role of parliamentarians and civil society. But if you allow me, I can pick some notes which I put down, which impressed me. For example, having Secretary General of the GCC saying that we have to be moderate and that we have to have the freedom of thinking, and also to denounce violence and terrorism, and advocate at the same time tolerance and acceptance. His Excellency Bakush told us about the cooperation that is necessary between institutions. And Salem Al-Malik from ISESCO spoke about that there is no development without stability. These are the essence of what has been said in these very important interventions. Ahmed Yusuf, who's former president of International Court of Justice, he talked about the preeminent role of the rule of law and also the role of education, cooperation, and mutual respect. Our colleague from UNHCR, His Excellency Khaled Khalifa, spoke about the need and that we have to deal with the consequences because of the absence of peace. It's not just absence of peace, but we have to deal with the consequences of that, and that peace has become a dream and a luxury for millions of people around the world. Our colleague, Mohammed Al-Shafif from Glasgow, spoke about the need for dialogue and mutual understanding and respect to dignity of the human being. Professor Alfred Vella spoke about why universities should engage in peace building, repeating that education helps achieve peace and that whatever he quoted from well-known world authorities on the definition of peace and absence thereof has to be implemented. Then we come to the second session, which was monitored by my friend and colleague, Dr. Anju Farrugia, who spoke about the role of parliamentarians to maintain peace. But then we had very interesting and emotional, I would say, interventions by Mohammed Nasheed, to start with, about the free and fair political parties and elections, the need for that, and the peaceful transfer of power. Equally emotional was our colleague Hanno Pevkur from Estonia, and we can understand because he's coming from a country which has a border with Russia and which I was supposed to visit only next week, and I had to cancel because of the ongoing circumstances. He spoke about the future of democracy, human rights charters, and reflections on the danger of dictatorship. His Excellency Abdelasim Labar spoke again also passionately and with heartfelt emotions, telling the truth, telling that we have to say the truth with a very strong voice and to have to denounce war under any circumstance. Then we had His Excellency Stuart Stevenson, who spoke about the ban that we have to agree to on the political use of religions. My colleague Jasmine Saliba looked at the attainment and maintenance of peace and the role of voluntary organizations. And I was struck by the fact that his children, his wife, who is Polish, have got to try to understand what's happening in the country of their grandparents. Finally, there was Monsieur Christopher Bass, who spoke about the nature of modern world divisions between countries and within countries themselves. So I think that from all of this, we have to somehow bring ourselves down to some sort of decisions that we must have taken after these 2 days of discussions. And I'm going to mention some points not in the order of importance. It has been underlined that we need the involvement of NGOs and regional organizations to maintain cultural peace, as well as university think tanks. We reflected on the responsibility of ensuring effective role of responsible leadership to bring harmony and peace in our societies. We reflected on our commitment to reinforcing preventive diplomacy in order to maintain the global culture of peace, as well as ensuring gender empowerment and the effective role of women, who constitute 50% of societies, and also assigning to them more importance in all aspects of life. We repeatedly heard the appeal for more direct involvement of world leaders and institutions in achieving a just peace. And we definitely have heard that we have to make sure that youth have an effective voice, that we have to cultivate respect of multi-faith societies in different countries, and the very important as well, the very important consideration of the control of the distribution of small arms and light weapons. This meeting has clearly underlined the need of accentuating the power of dialogue because peace cannot be simply taken for granted. The necessity of identifying and eliminating the root causes of conflict and of physical violence, as well as the promotion of the dignity of every human being and the recognition of the values of understanding, dialogue, as well as solidarity. Finally, we have to implement United Nations 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development Goals, relating especially to Goal 16 about peace, justice, and strong institutions. In conclusion, dear Mr. Al-Babtain, Presidents, speakers, excellencies, and distinguished guests, I thank you all for your valuable contribution to this global discussion on peace. It's very important that precisely because of the persistent aggressions, the breaches of human rights, the threats to sovereignty, the oppression of entire nations, we, the international community, continue to press for democracy, for justice, and for peace. We may not have solved any conflicts or crisis through our discussions, but we certainly gave a voice to those amongst us whose freedom, well-being, and in some cases, their very existence is put in peril. My very final words are a reiteration of the message I conveyed yesterday on the ongoing war on European soil. Our ultimate collective hope is for credible and effective negotiations that result in a durable cessation of these appalling attacks and relief of the people of Ukraine from the harm, the anguish, and the deep distress that they have been experiencing for days. Yet, the violence continues. The world spoke out loud and clear at the United Nations General Assembly on 2nd March through the adoption of the resolution aggression against Ukraine with an overwhelming majority. I add my voice, and I'm sure the general feeling of this conference, to this resounding global condemnation of illegal and unprovoked attacks on a sovereign state and the immense suffering they are causing to the people. We need to stand together to safeguard and defend the rules-based international system. And we all have a role to play in our own professions, in our roles as politicians, and in our activities. No country, large or small, should be threatened and endangered in this way. This is something that we cannot accept in this day and age, for anyone, anywhere around the globe. I ask you to take these thoughts with you back home and urge you to be agents of tolerance and peace in all your actions. Thank you for your attention. Thank you.